I know we talk a lot about sort of smart people know the right answers, brilliant people ask the right questions. And I often get a lot from folks, and when I give keynotes into my coaching, are sort of one of the top skills that a CISO needs. Like, what differentiates good CISOs from great to world class? Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome to this week's episode of Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. E is in the house. I know we talk a lot about sort of smart people know the right answers, brilliant people ask the right questions. And I often get a lot from folks, and when I give keynotes into my coaching, are sort of one of the top skills that a CISO needs. Like, what differentiates good CISOs from great to world class? Right? I've been a CISO many times. I'm currently doing a lot of vCISO work, and I sort of work with a lot of folks, and I'm sort of always observing and looking for patterns of consistency. The first one is really knowing what business your organization is really in. What is really the driving factor? And this is one where building up that reputation of being a chief officer focused on information security is really going to help, because guess what? The way you're going to figure out what business your company is really in is by being in the boardroom, listening to the board of directors, talking with the CEO, talking with the COO. What drives their decisions? What drives what they're doing and why they're doing it? Because here's the reality. Yes, you can go in and look at the market that your business is in. Whether you're in retail, whether you're medical hospital, whether you're going in a financial services, whether you're critical infrastructure. That is important at one level, knowing and understanding what your critical data is. Right? Because your critical data is going to differ and focus and change based on what vertical you operate in. However, the business you're really in is going to also impact how you implement security, how you communicate it, and how you prioritize risk within the organization. So what I'm getting at is this. I work with some companies where their current focus is on stabilization. They've acquired a lot of companies. They have a lot of volatility in their market share. And what they're really trying to do now is just have consistent growth year over year. A 10 or 15% growth for the next 3 years. They just want to stabilize. They want to get back in good confidence with the shareholders and publicly traded, and sort of get their stock growing and expanding the way it should. Well, you're going to approach cybersecurity differently for that company than if they're a startup that is taking a ton of risk and doesn't have a lot of budget. And you're going to approach cybersecurity completely differently if you're very well established, have a lot of money in the bank, and your current strategy of your CEO and COO and board of directors is to do aggressive acquisition of smaller players in the space to expand and grow your business line and increase your profitability and revenue double or triple in the next 12 or 18 months. So the vertical you operate in sets a foundation of critical data and mindset, but the business they're really in, of how are they operating and what are they doing and what are their priorities? Are their priorities the shareholders? Are the priorities their customer? Are they trying to be known as the most user-friendly hospital? I know one hospital we worked with where there was a lot of friction with the CISO and the executive team is because this hospital was in a competitive area, it was in a large city where there were lots of hospitals, and their focus was treating patients fast, quick, and efficiently. So they were known that if you come into the ER, you actually get seen within 5 minutes, and within 3 hours, you either get admitted or you get diagnosed and dismissed from the hospital. Because we know with a lot of hospitals, you can wait in the waiting room for 2 or 3 hours, and then you can go back to ER and be there for another 7 or 8 hours. So that's what their primary focus is. Well, now if the CISO didn't understand that, and they're putting in a lot more security and a lot more mechanisms and a lot more ways that ultimately increase the security, protect the client information, and protect the leakage of data, but it slows down the process of admitting a patient. It makes it much harder and more difficult for the doctor to actually access records and get information and data. That's going to be in contrast to the growth of the business. So what business are you really in? What are the key drivers? What are the key revenue numbers? What are the key mottos or principles or messaging that they're giving out both internally and externally? And then the CISO needs to embrace that and say, how can we allow this company to achieve those results quicker, faster, and better with more security? Right? It's one of those you hear me say, and it's one that I think is such a bad quote. Well, you hear a lot of people, and I just was at a conference and was listening to the person in front of me, and they said, I mean, faster, quicker, secure, right? Pick one, right? Or I guess faster, cheaper, faster and quicker are the same. I guess faster, cheaper, secure, pick one. And I'm like, no, right? That leads to old school thinking and ineffective CISOs. That's why I just did an interview on one of my podcasts, and they made the comment of, yeah, that's why CISOs have a lifespan of 12 to 14 months, and then they're always looking for a new job. And it's because they're disconnected with the executives. They're not focusing on that chief officer. So to me, why can't you have efficient, cost-effective cybersecurity? If you align with the business and use it as a business enabler, you absolutely can. And I'm sort of now in a little bit of this dilemma, right, where I'm always sort of going back and forth going, do I like this or don't I like this? And what I'm referring to is one of the banks that I do business with. I recently went back and said, it would be nice if there were this protection and that protection around my account, right? So nobody can just go in, because when you do EFTs and you give somebody permission to withdraw or deposit, they basically can go in and withdraw and deposit anytime they want. It's sort of a global permission. And I'm like, I don't like that. Why can't it be more granular and more specific? And they came back and said, hey, we have this product, and for $79 a month, you can get all these additional security features. And I'm sort of sitting there like, part of me is like, wait a second. Shouldn't security be built in? Shouldn't security be part of the product? And the base security is. But then another part of me is, I always said that to control your destiny, cybersecurity should be P&L, right? It should be generating profit. What if cybersecurity was not an overhead function, but actually made money, broke even, or provided a new business line of profitability to the company? And this bank was doing that. So I'm like, So they're sort of listening to what I said, but then I'm also struggling. So I sort of drop your thoughts below. I love your thoughts on where's that line between security embedded, but if you want additional or higher end security, there's actually a cost or a charge. So now you're controlling your destiny by not being an overhead function, but by actually making profit and a revenue for the company. And this is what we talked about of cybersecurity being a business enabler. Next, what are your critical assets and the key business processes that support them? Because a lot of times we focus on putting in a lot of different perimeter defense and different mechanisms, but ultimately, what is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? It's the data that was compromised and the business processes that were impacted. If somebody breaks into a company and they compromise a system, but it doesn't have any critical data and it doesn't really impact operations of the business, it's really not a big issue or a big breach. We had one of our clients that had an older website that was up and running and it got compromised. It was on an isolated segment because they had some zero trust. It didn't have any critical data and it didn't really provide much aspect to the business, and they caught it relatively quick. And what did they do? They just shut it down. And it wasn't providing value, it didn't have any impact. Now, my question is, great, that fits our idea of detecting attacks in a timely manner and minimizing the impact. But my bigger question is, why wasn't that website taken down 2 years ago when it was no longer being used by that business unit? It's because they didn't have full visibility into their systems. So my question, when was the last time you did a complete inventory of every system on your network or cloud provider and verified and validated that it was being used? This is something we recently went through where we as a growing company, we have different employees and different folks coming on board. And we sat down and looked at all the different services we were paying on a monthly basis. And the original response from my team, I'm like, are these legitimate? And the answer was, well, yeah, because we've been paying them for 2 years. And I'm like, as the person who money comes out of my bank account, that's not a good answer. Just because we've been paying for 2 years doesn't mean we've been using it. So we went back and we were able to save over $8,000 a month on services that we just weren't using, that we just weren't needing. And every one of them, from a supply chain standpoint, represented a point of exposure or a point of compromise. So world-class CISOs focus on understanding their entire domain and focusing on simplification and prioritization. You know how much simpler it was having a company now that only has 5 processes that we pay monthly or vendors and not 15 or 20? Right? It's much simpler, much easier, much more focused. So world-class CISOs are going to go in and say, okay, is everything that's running on our network need to be running on our network? And this is something you might work with IT, you might work with others. And here's the difference between a good CISO and a world-class CISO. World-class CISOs will show the cost-benefit analysis is worth it. Because what happens if you come in and you start saying, we need to inventory all the systems on our network. We need to go in and start assessing what systems are needed and what systems aren't. You get pushback going, Eric, we're too busy. We don't have enough staff. We don't have enough time. And when I go in and go, listen, investing 5 hours now will save you 50 hours later. Because if you're maintaining systems that are not needed, that requires a lot extra work. If your team has to go in and patch and update and harden 50 servers, yet in reality, only 30 are needed, only 30 are required to run the business, and the other 20 are older, legacy, or not needed or not required, and you can spend time getting rid of those 20, think of how much you've optimized your team. Now they're updating operating systems, patching applications on almost 40% less of what they were doing last quarter. 40% less work is a huge return that provides a whole lot of value and a whole lot of benefit to the organization. So focusing in and really understanding all the critical assets, the business processes that support it, what are the security measures in place, and then removing, getting rid of, or mitigating systems that are not needed or not required. Another aspect of that is the visibility. What is the visibility of those components? Right now, attacks occur basically one of two ways. Either phishing or social engineering of employees, or exploiting or breaking into external servers. And most of the attacks we're seeing today are unpatched systems. Yes, there's still a percent of 0-day. There's still going to be those attack vectors that you really can't do much to protect or prevent. I mean, a 0-day is a 0-day, right? That's going to happen. But if you can go in and stop unpatched systems from being compromised by patching within a timely manner, that's going to go a long way to protect and secure your infrastructure and your enterprise. The other thing, talking about phishing attacks, simplifying and removing vectors of attack. This is one I've talked about for a while, and it's now becoming real time. You must address this. What is the number one reason why employees get phished? Why employees get compromised and users go in and are one of the weakest links? Because of embedded links or attachments in emails or text messages. Now, my question is this. Email and texting were never meant as a data communication mechanism, right? They were never meant for transferring files or embedding links. They were communication, right? A text message, hey, I uploaded a new file to the Dropbox, check it out. That's a proper use. Going and going, here's a new file, click on it, is not. So if we go in and we take away the ability for external people to send us embedded links or attachments in emails, we go in and take away most of the phishing attacks. Now here's where let data drive decisions, not emotions. We were working with a client that had a lot of phishing. They were getting compromised, attacked, constant, and they were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, sometimes even millions. And it was getting out of hand. So we're in the board meeting. I was brought in as sort of special advisory, sort of a temporary CISO to address and deal with the situation. And I said, I assessed the business. I looked at the vectors, and you don't need more user awareness. That's what they were going to do. You need to reduce the attack surface. We need to go in and for any external emails, block embedded links and attachments. Well, you would think I was committing the crime of the century. People were screaming and yelling, you can't do that. You'll negatively impact the business. Our customers need, I mean, it was like crazy at a level you've never seen. And I'm like, data proves it's not. You guys are getting emotional and you're not looking at the data. The data proves otherwise. Well, they went crazy and we sort of ended my 20 minutes and the committee went on. Well, it ends and I'm about to leave the room and the CEO says, hey, Eric, stick around. He goes, do you actually believe it will have minimal impact if we do this? And I said, yes. And do you believe it will drastically reduce the number of attacks? I said, absolutely. He's like, I'm giving you authorization to do it, but don't tell anybody. He goes, I want you to go in today and for all external email, block embedded links and attachments, but don't tell anyone. So we did it. 3 months later, we have the next board meeting and we present the stats and go, we've had no phishing and no monetary loss to the business. This is a record. Like, it's never, ever happened in the last 3 years. And everyone's like, see, Eric, you didn't need to do this. And then the CEO smiles and goes, tell him. I said, well, after the meeting, I met with the CEO and he authorized me to block embedded links and attachments, and we have for the last 90 days. And there's 2 things I want to point out to you. One, no impact on the business. Not one of you complained. Not one of you said you can't work with your customers. And not one of you said it has a negative impact. You didn't even notice. And second, it stopped all of the phishing attacks to the business. And you just sort of heard silence. Now, I'm not saying covert missions should be done without approval and buy-in from executives, but the reality is a lot of times we get a lot more emotional. And as we always say, we need to let data drive decisions, not emotions. The next one is, are you spending money in the right area? And this sort of goes back to the business you're in. If we go back to our definition of cybersecurity, let's play it out again. Understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. Now, we've talked about risk a lot, and one of the items that we've talked about is risk tolerance. You must have a risk tolerance with your executives, because if they think you should be 100% secure and they think that attacks should never happen, you're going to be short-lived. And as we've talked about many times, so I won't spend as much time on this, but most companies believe there should be zero risk. How do we know? After there's a breach and after there's a compromise, what do most companies do? Fire the CISO. That's saying they have zero tolerance for risk. However, there's going to be breaches. Embrace the breach, don't fight it. And you need to have an agreed to what is and is not acceptable level of risk. So we handled the first part. Then if we continue, cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical assets. That was the second item we talked about today. Critical assets and business processes. Now, let's sort of talk about the third, is cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical assets being disclosed, altered, or denied access. That's the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, here's the challenge, and this goes back to aligned with the business. Where are you spending the money versus where is the priority? So one of my favorite exercises, and I urge you to do this the next week or next month, is go back and take everything you've spent on your security budget. So if your security budget is $5 million for the last 2 years, that's 10 mil. I want you to list on a spreadsheet everything you've purchased with security. Then I want you to put 3 columns: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I just want you to put an X or just a 1, because then it'll be easier for the spreadsheet. So if that item addressed confidentiality, put a 1. If it didn't, put a 0. If it addressed integrity, put a 1. Otherwise, a 0, and same thing for availability. So just go through each of these items and just put 1s and 0s of whether they addressed confidentiality, integrity, availability. Then tally them up and create a pie chart. What percent of your budget have you spent on confidentiality, integrity, availability? Now, put that away for a second. Don't show it to your execs just yet. Go to your executive team and ask them, what percent of our budget should we be spending on confidentiality, integrity, availability? Or if you want to do the reverse, what percent of our budget should we be spent on disclosing, altering, and denial of access to our data, preventing those from happening. Now, many execs will be like, I don't know. So give them a pie chart and do 33, 33, 33. And say, okay, I'm going to start off with equal. So we should spend a third of our budget on confidentiality, preventing disclosure, a third of our budget on integrity, preventing alteration, and a third of our budget on availability, preventing denial of access. And they're going to go in and start to move the bars. Maybe we'll spend more on this and more on that. It really depends on the business and the vertical. Now, once their pie chart is complete, take their pie chart, take your pie chart, and compare them and see if they're the same. I will tell you, in companies where the CISO has been there for 3 or 4 years and has a really good relationship and invited to all the board meetings, almost guaranteed they're the same. Organizations that have had a high turnover where they fire CISOs every 12 to 18 months, and this CISO's been there for 3 or 4 months, I can almost guarantee that those pie charts are different. And then finally, as we sort of start to wrap up, world-class CISOs go in and do presentations to the executives using 3 to 4 slides. I know I get so much slack from CISOs saying, Eric is out of touch because you need a 40 slide deck to brief the executives. I've never seen that effective. Prove it to me. I'd love to sit in, but that's not the detail they need. They need to know what are the core threats to your business, what are your critical assets, and then the magic slide, giving you a big piece of gold here. This advice is probably worth $40,000, $50,000 because companies have paid me to put this in place and implement. But you have the slide on your risks, which are really focused on there's 3 columns. 4 columns. What could happen, likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, and cost to fix it. And then you list the top 5, the 7 risks for your business. That's what executives want to see. It's speaking the language of business. They want to know what could happen. That's the risk, but you say it in English. And then they want to know numbers. What is the likelihood of it occurring, the cost if it occurs, and the cost to fix it? If you do that, you now become the best friend. You're now speaking English, you're speaking business, and you're fully aligned with the executives. So as always, my intent of these podcasts is to give you actionable things you can directly put into work today, tomorrow, and the next day. So what if you went in and asked about the critical assets? You started working with IT to reduce the footprint. What if you did that CIA pie chart comparison? Or what if you started putting together that last slide of what could happen, likelihood of occurring, cost if it occurred, or cost to fix it, and start focusing on being that chief officer with a specialty in information security. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO, and please make sure to join me next week